In order to be able to do multiplication and division of uncertainties, we need to make use of the relative uncertainties. So to start with multiplication, if we have something like this, 10 plus or minus 1, and we want to multiply it with 30 plus or minus 3. Unlike addition and subtraction, we can't combine the two uncertainties by adding them together. What we can do is multiply the two values, so 10 times 30, which is 300. So we can do that with that value, but how we combine these uncertainties, we can't add them together like we did before. What we need to do is convert them to their relative uncertainties before we add them together. And so we did that a couple videos ago, where we converted these into their relative uncertainties. So you can refer to that for an refresher. But we basically take this and find it as a percentage of its value. So in the case of 10 plus or minus 1, that's 10% of, it's a 10% uncertainty. And same with this, it's also 10%. So we have them in their relative uncertainties, and if I write it out, 10 plus or minus 10% times 30 plus or minus 10%. Now what we can do is, now that it's in this form, we can add it together. So we multiply the two values, 300, and we can take this plus or minus 10 plus 10. And so our answer is 300 plus or minus 20%. Now you may be wondering why we have to do it this way, and in the next video I will go over kind of the derivation of this multiplication and division formulas that tell us why we need these in their relative uncertainty forms. But let's do a division example now. Let's do the same numbers, 10 plus or minus 1, and let's divide by 30 plus or minus 3. So in this case, we have the same thing, except we divide. So we can divide the our actual values, so that would just be 1/3. And these values are the same, 10%, so we can plus or minus 10% plus 10%. And again, we add together because uncertainties, they always compile if you have more of them. And that's 1/3 plus or minus 20%. Or if you want to write in decimal form, 0.33 plus 20%. So that's division. Now there's one more case we can look at, which is multiplication by a constant. So let's say we have 2, just the number 2, and we want to multiply it by this value. So there are two different cases here. One is if we have the uncertainty value as its exact value or as its relative value. And we treat it differently based on what it is. So if it's the exact value like this, we can distribute the 2 to both values. So we're multiplying the 10 by 2 and then the uncertainty of the 1 by 2, which gives us 20 plus or minus 2. So that's one case, and that's the actual value case. But if it's in its relative uncertainty, so it looks like this, 2 plus or minus 10%, then we don't distribute. So we take 2 times 10 plus 10%. And that gives us 20 plus or minus 10%. Because if you look at it, 2 is 10% of 20, and so we don't want to distribute the 2 to the 10% because these two things tell us the same thing. So those are a few cases, and in the next video, I will derive the reasons for the relative uncertainty, and then we will do some practice problems probably in the video following that. So that's all for that.